Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Super Coach Mates. Well, we're working through our reviews of 2024 season. So today we have got the two South Australian clubs, so Adelaide and Port Adelaide. So it's basically going to be the same format as last week for those of you who've watched our Collingwood and Carlton season review. So as per normal, I am joined by Thomas. How are you going, Thomas?
Yeah, not too bad. Been a busy week. We were exciting again this week, but also trade periods up and about. Been a bit quiet first day of trades. I think the trades that went through today, you're looking at Jack Darwin to North, Neil Bullen to the Crows, and Joe Richards has requested a trade to Port Adelaide, which are much to Nathan's dislike. But yeah, I mean, I guess it will get right in the swing of things as the days progress and kind of as the trade ball moves on and more deals get broke. But we'll keep you up to date on our socials and all that with regards to the trade period and the silly season ahead. But as we said last episode, we're moving into the Crows and Port, so the two teams down in South Australia. So I'll kick things off by bringing up this one. So we start off with the Adelaide Crows 2024 season. They finished 15th, so I would probably say C minus. I've just reflected that on the spot. I reckon that's a bit very generous, but I think they just never really got their season going. They had very high expectations given onto them. Their best result was probably that 99-point win against the West Coast Eagles. Granted, West Coast aren't really the best team going around at the moment, but they really showed what they're made of when they do have a healthy list on their side. I think there was issues fundamentally, I think, with the Crows all season. Questions had to be asked with Nix's coaching style, considering you've got Rankin, Rochelle, Jordan Dawson, Rory Laird, pretty A-list names there. Probably I'd C minus is very, very generous. I'd be closing to a D or an E realistically. But what are your thoughts, Nathan, on the Crows season? And do you reckon they bounce back in 2025, considering since recording this podcast, we've heard obviously the news late last week that the likes of Isaac Cumming from the Giants has moved there, so that provides a bit of depth in the defensive line or a bit of strength there, and also James Peatley nominated the Crows as his preferred destination, which definitely helps defensively speaking, and Neil Bullen as well. That's been confirmed today. But what are your thoughts on the Crow season for 2024 so far, or not so far, but in review?
Yeah, well, basically, unfortunately, I think everything that could go wrong for Adelaide did go wrong for Adelaide. I just wonder if that final or that second last game of 2023 with the goal umpire, I wonder if that just mentally scarred them this year. Because quite often we talk about grand finalists who lose by really big margins being mentally scarred. And I just wonder if this was Adelaide this year. Some people say they overachieved last year, but perhaps they actually underachieved last year, to be honest. Given where their numbers were last year, I think they probably deserved to play finals last year. So I just wonder if perhaps there was a bit of a mental scarring there from that the goal umpiring incident. But yeah, they just couldn't get their game going. Basically, their best player in Rankin, once he moved into the midfield, he sort of got them going a little bit. But yeah, I think Adelaide are one club that I think with a good pre-season, they can just put what happened with the goal umpire behind them for the year. Put that to the burner because it's not really relevant anymore. I still have faith that the way that Adelaide play can get them back up quite sharply next year.
100% agree with regards to that one. I think the Crows, I'll be pretty bullish on their potential top 8 aspirations and even top 4 if they can get their right team on the park. I guess, realistically speaking, they've got the talent there. It's really whether Matty Nix can get his coaching right and really get the best out of his players, because I think they're not a club where you're looking at 15th and thinking, where do we go from here? We need to top up on the draft and we need A-grade talent coming through the door. I think they've got that in bucket loads. It's whether they can get bang from their buck from their players, and also capitalise on home ground advantages at Adelaide Oval and really make that a fortress like it has been in previous years. But moving on to this will be close to your Nath Snag segment with regards to infamous credibility with regards to how well Nathan's been nailing his stats. But obviously, as we said or touched on in the last podcast with Carlton and Collingwood, this is something we'll keep consistent throughout the remainder of the trade period and potentially into 2025 when we look more deeper into Supercoach. Because as I said, doing the eye test is one thing, but also having the stats to back it up is really important as well. And if you're into your stats, that's definitely the segment to listen to. So how do the Crows go statistically speaking in 2024?
Well, so Adelaide really only had one avenue for scoring, and that was their ability to score from the back half. They were number 6 at scoring from the back half, and they were also top 6 at defending scores from their own back half turnovers. So in terms of that, that's a massive tick for Adelaide in 2024. Unfortunately, though, for Adelaide, basically everything else is either red or yellow. And red means bottom 6, and yellow means sort of they're in the mid-table range. But the thing for me, and again, I'm going to keep harping on about this, but the turnover game, which just for those of you who don't know, in case you haven't been listening, is basically what you score from turnover versus what you give up from turnover. It is a premiership indicator. So last year, Adelaide were 4th at scores from turnover. So this is why I think that perhaps there was a bit of that's going. So they were 4th in scores from turnover last year, and this year they fell all the way down to 13th. Which basically correlates with their ladder position. And when we do a lot of these reviews, what you'll find is that scores from turnover is actually basically a near correlation of where the team's finished on the ladder. So this is why you need to have a good turnover game, because if you don't have a good turnover game, you're generally not going to, be in the top echelon of teams. So we talked about this, but I'll just quickly go over. So Brisbane, Carlton, Sydney, Hawthorn, Bulldogs all were top 5 this year, and they all played finals. And then the bottom 5, Essendon, Melbourne, West Coast, Richmond, and North Melbourne were basically the bottom 5 clubs on the ladder. So there is that correlation there. Where to improve for Adelaide? Well, as I said, 2023, they basically had a lot of stuff going for them. They were a really strong territory side. They were top 6 in that. That fell away to bottom 6. Bottom 6 for territory, so inside 50 differential. What else have we got here? Scores from stoppage. They were never really good at defending them. In 2023, they were good at scoring from them. But yeah, it was basically their ability to score just across the ground other than the back half that basically just let them down. So this is why I'm a little bit bullish on Adelaide, because I feel like the talent's there with Adelaide. I think it was just the fact that their best player in Rankin was in and out of the side. Dawson had a bit of a down year. We might touch on him from Supercoach, but he had a bit of a down year. I think the back line itself got a little bit exposed. And then their one wood in 2023, which was that really high efficiency. When they had the ball inside 50, they were really efficient at scoring from it. Well, that just completely fell away in 2024. This is why, as I said, this is why I'm bullish on Adelaide, and I think they can spike. I don't know how high they can spike, but I definitely think that come 2025, my expectation of Adelaide is that they're pushing for finals, if not actually making finals. Because I just feel like that they sort of had the linear growth, or the exponential growth, and then they had the dip year. Which quite often we see sides who are coming out of a rebuild do have a dip year and then they bounce back up. So I wonder if this was just Adelaide's dip year, and next year I think they should be aiming for maybe the bottom half of the top 8, I think, is a realistic marker. But that's why I'm bullish on Adelaide, because if they can get back to what they did last year, and with a little bit more luck, I think they can really turn Adelaide Oval into a fortress like they had in 2023. And yeah, the way that they play seems to trouble a lot of the best sides. The last 3 times they play Collingwood, they've all been single-digit margins, so they can match it with the best. It's just whether or not they can do it consistently, which I feel like is just an age profile. But yeah, I'm quite bullish on Adelaide for 2025. I'm not sure how you feel, Thomas, but I am quite bullish on Adelaide.
Yeah, I think watching them live and coming from the eye test perspective, I think they're one that can really push for finals aspirations next year. As I said prior to you reeling off the stats, I think the one player in particular I want to see have a full preseason, be fully fit for round 1 is Riley Philthorpe. I think he's one player that is crucial, fundamentally speaking, for their forward line. I think without him, the forward line looked a bit messy, but with him, he provides a real focal point, and he's a real good player when he's fit. And you just have to look at Rochelle and Rankin to know that these guns are about to explode if they get the opportunity. I would say their one key weakness is their backline. I think if they can really strengthen that, whether it is through the draft or trade or just really solidify their kind of back six, I think that'll help. Midfield, I think, has had issues. I think if they nail Peatling and they can get him in the trade, I think that helps tons, because they've got Dawson, who just looked a shell of himself, really. Matt Crouch, Rory Laird in there. Doesn't really scream the most exciting two-way running side. I think Rankin definitely helps that in the midfield. They just need to really sort that probably forward and mid split with some of these players to really get the best out of them. I think if they do that, they'll definitely be a threat next year, that's for sure. And I could see them 15th being a bit of a one-year hit. But Adelaide trade ins and outs for this season. Cumming obviously was confirmed the other day on late last week as a confirmed in. Peatling, potentially, that trade just needs to be done. I'm interested to see if that trade actually does get done. Most of the time when players do request a trade, it does eventually get done, regardless of how pushy some clubs are, but he'll probably get done. Neil Bullen, since I made these slides up, he's been confirmed in today, so that changed from a question mark to a confirm. Elliot Himmelberg has been the confirmed out to the Gold Coast Suns. He's more of a depth player at the Crows, realistically speaking. And Ned McHenry's one player on my list who hasn't been offered a contract yet. He's one of when he came into the system, it was a real excitement machine that potentially could be on the outer now, just with the players they've got coming in. What are your thoughts on these trades in and out? Do you reckon they benefit the Crows, or is there any other players that you think either could be a good trade in or potentially a trade out to facilitate other trades for next season?
Yeah, so I will just clarify. Ned McHenry isn't out; he's been delisted. Adelaide confirmed that late last week that he's been delisted. So that's a definite out. Isaac Cumming, it makes sense because and I just reeled off the fact that their back half scoring was quite good. I just wonder if they see a different role for him, maybe pushing a bit higher up the ground, which I think will help, given that their front half game was nowhere near as potent as what it was last year. Their front half game. So I just wonder if that's the plan for him. Peatling, good player, will probably help them out. Neil Bullen, always had the go home factor. So I think Adelaide will consider themselves quite, pleased that they've won that Neil Bullen battle. Himmelberg, probably more of a depth player. I don't think he was going to get a game anyway. I feel like that Phil Thorpe and Darcy Fogarty have probably overtaken him for Adelaide's best 2 key forwards. I know Tex is still on the list. And obviously we've discussed Ned McHenry being delisted. So, I think overall, having a look at that, I think Adelaide will probably say that they've improved their list on last year. I'm just going to quickly have a look and see what position Peatling actually is just on Supercoach. He's a forward mid, okay.
Forward mid, yeah.
Yeah, so potentially, depending on what role he has, Yeah, I just wonder if that's the in for Adelaide that then unlocks the ability for Rankin if he can get a full preseason in and can get his fitness levels up. I just wonder if that's the cue for Rankin to become the full-time midfielder that Adelaide probably need him to be, given that he does have the X factor, and then you put Laird, you put Dawson, you put Matt Crouch in there. They're all a bit same. Whereas you throw Rankin in there, he's got excitement, he's got speed, he's got X factor, and I think that that's where Adelaide want Rankin to play. So I just wonder now with Peatling coming in, if that's Rankin's cue that we're going to give you a full-time midfield spot if you put the time and effort in. You don't have to worry about going forward anymore. Well, not as forward as much. But yeah, I just think that Adelaide will say, "Yep, tick. We've got another halfback flanker who can go up in the midfield. We've got another forward. We've got a sort of a tenacious player, Neil Bullen. We haven't really lost anyone, and if our best player can play full-time midfield for next year, well, why not?" So I think Adelaide will say that they've probably improved on their list. How that will pan out, obviously, time will tell. But I think at this stage, I think they've probably improved their list.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I think the big concern mid-season was potentially Rochelle might wanting to ask a trade with potentially how he was treated. I think you probably look at that argument both ways, whether, potentially a bit of young kid being a little bit too, ego inflated, or there were genuine concerns there. But I think Cumming and Peatling, if they can, well, I've nailed half of that. Cumming adds a bit of depth in their defensive line. That's what I just mentioned with regards to weaknesses there. And Peatling showed how good he was in that final series, and he's a defensive two-way runner. Probably can be a tagger in that midfield. As I mentioned, I posted something on Twitter earlier today with regards to Neil Bullen, or earlier yesterday when this episode gets released, with his trade out to the Crows. I think he helps if he wants to become a defensive mid in that rotation, but also a defensive forward. I think they're definitely a very exciting watch moving the ball forward, but I think the trade-ins they've got with Cumming, Peatling, and Neil Bullen probably suggests that they're looking for a bit more defensive capabilities going the other way when they lose that ball and turnover. So I think, those three trades, if they nail that, that's a much improved side in my eyes. But moving forward to a player to watch for next season in Supercoach. So the one I've got on my radar, I don't know if you got anyone else, Nathan, but Jake Saligo was one player that, this might all change come pre-season depending on their midfield mix, but I think he deserves a spot in there. One thing he brings is tackle pressure like crazy. Was the best player against Port in that showdown back in round 8. 146 Supercoach points, 28 disposals, 10 tackles and 6 clearances. Was a little bit iffy up and down throughout the season, just age profile as well. Probably means he's going to fatigue in those, longevity of the season. But he's one that I think, depending on what position he ends up being in Supercoach in 2025, could be a massive watch. If he can keep his centre bounce spots in 2025. And that's my main question, Nate. Do you think Saligo can maintain his position in the Crows' best 22? I think when Saligo moved into that midfield, the Crows looked a lot better. I think the big problem they had was with regards to Matt Crouch in there, Rory Sloane when he wasn't retired, and Jordan Dawson was very stale and one-sided. But do you reckon the likes of Saligo can keep his spot now that he played a lot of minutes in the midfield this season? Is he one that you think could be one to watch as a bit of an X factor moving into Supercoach in 2025?
No, I actually had the same player. I actually was going to mention Saligo as well. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I feel like that if there's one area where Adelaide have the talent to improve, like already on their list, it is that midfield. So he just touched on Crouch, Laird, Dawson, all being a bit the same. But throwing Saligo in there, throwing Rankin in there, it just adds something different to that Adelaide midfield. Saligo's only going to get better as he gets older. He gets a bigger frame. He gets more mature. I think that if there's one player from Adelaide who perhaps I'll keep my eye on and what his role is, and he's actually Saligo as well. Just because he showed that he can play. There's no doubt about that. It's obviously just the consistency factor, which, as I said, when he matures and gets a bit older, that will come. So, I don't really have anyone else from Adelaide. I think that sort of isn't necessarily a good thing, that you sort of can't really pick who's going to improve that list going forward. So perhaps Adelaide do need to get a bit creative. I know that their draft history isn't great. They don't have a lot of first round picks still on their list that they've sort of got in the last 5 or so years. So they are going to have to get a bit creative, with this, I guess, high end talent. They've got a lot of talent, but in terms of, the top 10, top 15 talent, there is a bit of a gap there. So that perhaps that might keep holding them back until they can fix that. But if they can improve everything, and I think Saligo is a massive part of this, I think they'll back their young kids to keep improving and keep getting better. And I think Saligo is a massive part of this. So, he is one that I've got my eye on. Otherwise, I don't really think there's anyone else that I would necessarily have my eye on from Adelaide. I'm just going to have a quick look now on Supercoach, but I don't think there's anyone really that relevant. Laird and Dawson will probably be underpriced.
Yeah.
I think Matt Crow, Fogg, no. Rankin, maybe, depending on his role. That's sort of where it sits with Adelaide, is that there's sort of, not really that high-end talent other than Rankin. There. So, they're going to have to obviously rely on guys like Saligo and Keys to, get them and just naturally grow. Saligo is the one for mine who I also have my eye on as sort of a bit of a breakout player.
Yeah, I think the consistent thing, I think, when I look back at the Crows is, there are slight concerns of, the players that breaking out to that next level. You look at obviously Rankin and Rochelle, but they're probably close to being that top tier bracket for the Crows. But I think when you look at improvement, you're looking within the four walls and seeing what improvement can you see from those players who are in that kind of B to A grade. I think Saligo is in that to get to an A+ standard. But yeah, I think for anything before we move on to their arch nemesis in Port, I think the biggest thing for the Crows is if they can get their A-listers in, elite players like your Dawsons and Laird to get career best season. If they can do that, then that's a big way to get into the finals and claim bragging rights in South Australia. But moving on to Port Adelaide season review. On the flip side, these players or this team really had, a rocky season, but at the end, they almost snatched it and got to grand final land, but just fell short. I think that's a consistent trend they've been having where, they've been the butt of many jokes where they've just been embarrassed on the final stage, and it's questions asked whether or not, there are fundamental issues where they can play a home and away season, no problem, but when it comes to finals, their game doesn't really adds up, which is a glaring problem. But they've signed on Ken Hinkley to 2025. So they've clearly trusted him in bringing the faith. And also, I know there's been conversations of potentially a Josh Carr transition to him full-time coaching. That's probably been pushed back by a year, realistically speaking, and to see what Ken Hinkley can maybe do for his final year in coaching. But they lost versus the Swans in a preliminary final. Really embarrassing loss, really, considering how poorly the Swans ended up performing against the Lions. And I think they'd be kicking themselves. They could probably put in a better show against the Swannies against the Lions. But what are your thoughts? I've given them a B+ there. I think getting to a prelim is deserving of that, regardless of how well or how much you might have thought that they deserved a final spot or got into a position where they could play finals again in 2024. But what are your thoughts on Port's year, and do you reckon they can go one step further in 2025?
No. I'll just be blunt. No, I don't think they can go any further than where they are. I will reveal in my stats that matter, but I think I've unlocked the reason why Port Adelaide keep failing at this sort of semi-final, prelim final, where they're a great home and away side. But then they get to finals and they don't do well. So, I think for Port Adelaide, they are going to have to change the way that they play. That much is clear for them to take the next next step. I feel like they've got the talent there already. But yeah, when we get into the stats, there is something I have highlighted as to perhaps why Port Adelaide keep failing at this sort of prelim final hurdle. They can't make the grand final. Which it was quite eye-opening when I went through it. Or obviously off camera. But yeah, I think they did very well to make the prelim finals, to be honest, even though they finished second. I was, as I said, the Geelong game I thought was an outlier. They probably overachieved in the Hawthorn game, but in hindsight, the Sydney game was always probably a step too far for whoever won that game, and they got shown up. So, back to the drawing board for Ken. But yeah, I mean, as I said, the way the Port Adelaide play gets them through a home and away season, it doesn't get them through a final series. I think I've got the answer why. But yeah, we'll say I think probably a C, just given the fact that they finished second. They had the home qualifying final. They had all the crowd behind them, and they monumentally just blew it. So. I think if you base it off the home and away season, I think B+ is probably deserving, but I feel like they've got to come down a rung or two just because of how they did in finals once again.
Yeah, no, I do agree there. I think, whether it is a mistake to sign Ken for another season based on how poorly they did perform in previous finals as well, is yet to be seen. But moving on to the stats that matter for the Port Adelaide Football Club, as you said, Nathan, there's obviously some glaring problems there based off the statistical side of things. Take it away, and what's the big problem down at Powerland?
Well, we touched on this scores from turnover. Well, I think I've unlocked it, to be honest. So 2023. So I'm just going to go out on a limb and say the stats say that the Port Adelaide version of 2023 was better than the Port Adelaide version of 2024. Now, that might surprise some people, but you've got to remember that last year, Port Adelaide went on a 10-game winning streak, and they basically fell over in the last, 6 weeks of the year, and then they fell away in the finals again. But up until that point, they basically were really strong in a lot of areas. But the glaring issue for Port Adelaide is once again their ability to play the turnover game. Last year they ranked, seven, eight. Last year they ranked 9th in the turnover game. This year they ranked 12th in the turnover game. So Collingwood, who actually finished 9th on the ladder, actually had a better turnover game than Port Adelaide, even though Port Adelaide finished second. So that tells me that the way that Port Adelaide play fundamentally cannot stand up if a side brings high pressure, turns it into a chaos game, because generally what happens is the control game doesn't stand up in this type of, pressure cooker environment where you've got a lot of turnovers, the ball's pinging back and forward. You don't have control of the game for the whole, 120 minutes. And we saw in the finals against Geelong and Sydney, they basically just didn't turn up, and that's why, because they were high, they were high pressure, high turnover games, which Port Adelaide don't cope with. I know Collingwood have a really good record against Port Adelaide at the MCG, and this is why, because they just turn it into a scrap. But the other issue with Port Adelaide too, is whilst they are very good at playing the corridor game, there is the risk with the corridor game in that if you're going to turn the ball over in corridor, you're going to leave your whole back line exposed. And although they did improve from last year, their one-on-one defending was still a little bit questionable. That's why they moved Asava Radagalia forward, to sort of, I guess, get him out of there. But yeah, again, just a systematic, I guess, failure. And we touched on this as well, that Port Adelaide's defensive profile actually going into the finals was really, really solid. But then you actually have a little bit of look at the underlying numbers across the whole season, and there were, I guess, concerns there with their turnover game being bottom six at scoring from turnover, but they were really good at defending turnover. So there is that. But I guess the one thing as well you think of Port Adelaide is that they are a really strong territory team. But they're scoring from front half, which is what the game they want to play. They want to play the game locked in their front half. I guess it's all good and well to have that game, and big tick to them. They were top six for inside 50 differentials. So that, again, like the turnover, that's just your inside 50s versus what you allow the opposition per game. So they were top six at that, but then they were only mid-table at scoring from them. So, there are, I guess, issues at Port Adelaide which need to be fixed. But yeah, I think this is why Port Adelaide perhaps have been held back, is because they don't have a good turnover profile. And until that improves, I don't think that they're going to be competing, with the Brisbanes and the Sydneys and the Collingwoods of 2023 and, the Hawthorns, if they can back up what they did this year, just because I feel like that, yes, all credit to them for that Hawthorn win. I still think that win was a bit more off emotion more than anything. After the week that they had building up into that, there was always, I guess, going to be a bit of a response. So I'm happy to cop that from Port Adelaide supporters if they say, it was a win of grit and determination, because they basically only just fell over in that game against Hawthorn anyway. And it basically was only a sort of a 2 or 3 goal burst at the start of the last quarter that gave them that gap to get them over the line. But yeah, this is fundamentally why I think Port Adelaide now, the biggest question for Port Adelaide in 2025 is how do they get this turnover profile from being a mid-table profile into a top 6 profile? Because I feel like that will go a long way to helping Port Adelaide, I guess, break through this prelim curse and this semi-final curse, where they just fundamentally keep failing. Because you have a look at who they lost to. Sydney are number 2 in the turnover game. Geelong were top 6 going into that game in the semi-final. I think they were top 6, or that qualified final. I think they were top 6 in that. But obviously having the week off, it does sort of distort the numbers a little bit. But yeah, they were top. I'm pretty sure they were top 6 going into that game. And yeah, they just got found out in the chaos games once again that their game plan and their front half game, if they can't lock the ball in their front half, they get exposed back the other way. And that was basically Port Adelaide's season. So for Port Adelaide, they've got to figure out how to capitalize on their forward 50 entries. They've got to figure out how to score from the back half, and they've got to figure out how to get their turnover game from being a mid-table side into a top 6 side.
Yeah, no, I do agree in that regards. I think watching them live and, watching them even in the flesh at Marvel when they played St Kilda, they're a very downhill, scarce team. I think they get that tag pretty regularly, and I think as you rightly pointed out, the stats don't lie with regards to their struggle to compete when the ball is hotly contested, when there's high pressure on their stakes. You saw them against Sydney. The way they dumped that ball inside 50 was, reminiscent of St Kilda at the worst of times. And
Geelong.
Yeah, exactly. And they got to really capitalise on the fact that they have a really powerful forward line in Georgiades, Marshall. I think they've got issues if you're throwing a Sava down forward when he was, recruited potentially as a backman. I think they really need to sort out their mix desperately. And they've got one of the best midfielders going around in Butters, Rosie, and Horne-Francis. So there's no excuse there. You can't use the ruck excuse either. Jordan Sweet's actually held his own very nicely. Even if Houston leaves, I think they've got a lot of talent down half back. So yeah, 2025 is make or break, I think, and Ken's on his last legs, I think, if that's the case, if they fail again. But moving on to the trade ins and outs, Lukosius, I think, has requested himself to go to Port. I think he actually helps a lot. Mobility wise, I think the biggest problem that Port have is they don't have that leading forward. Georgiades and Marshall maybe were touted to be that case, but they just aren't. Dixon it was just aged out of that possibility. Willie Rioli, if you looked at that final series, was the one that was actually connecting the midfield and forward transition. Lukosius has done exactly that for the Suns, and he's just taller and stronger. So I think he is a really important get if they can get him over the line. Richards, as we mentioned, is now confirmed requested trade. I think he's also going to provide a bit of spark in that forward line mix and help Rioli. Riley Garcia from the Dogs is also one that potentially get, which I don't think that'll happen now. Well, I'd be surprised if it does happen if they go Richards and Garcia, because I can only see one of the two getting into the best 22. Dan Houston, there's been much talk about where he'll go. I reckon you guys might actually have a fair say, Nathan, the Pies, with regards to getting him over to black and white, which will be big for him. And Ivan Soldo, obviously, was not. I don't think he's actually officially requested anything yet, but he did come out and publicly say that it was a mistake, essentially getting into Port, and it was the mistake of a trade. He really should have stayed in Victoria. St Kilda's looking at him as a potential cover for Marshall. I think that's basically been confirmed as nothing's been actually requested yet, but wouldn't be surprised if he goes to St Kilda. What are your thoughts on those trades in and out? Is that a big tick for the Power, or there's something left to be desired with their trade-ins in particular?
Oh, well, it depends on what Jack you get. He probably fits Port Adelaide in the downhill skier category. When he was on the Gold Coast, he was very on, and when he was off, he was very off. So I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing for Port Adelaide to get another player like that. Joe Richards, off camera, I did speak with Thomas about Joe Richards off camera. Obviously, being a Collingwood supporter, I am a little bit disappointed that I feel like he's chosen money over at a club that gave him a chance. But I guess that's his right as a player. He's allowed to do that. But Port Adelaide are going to get a really classy forward. He's got a really good football brain, mature age. I think he just slots straight into that Port Adelaide forward line and becomes, a bit of a goal sneak. Riley Garcia, I'm not sure if that one's going to happen now. As you touched on, I don't think you really want two of the same player brought into the club unless there's desperately needed. Dan Houston... I think it's now a race in two. I think it's a race in Carlton and Collingwood who will end up with him at this stage. Based on how it seems like it's falling, I think Collingwood are probably just ahead of Carlton. Which, as a Collingwood supporter, obviously I think he's going to miss the first 2 weeks of the season because of that suspension anyway. But obviously you can still train, you can still play the preseason, the unofficial preseason game. You can still do that. So I feel like whoever gets him, you're getting a ready-made player. And just speaking with a Collingwood perspective, they did flirt with Isaac Quainer playing higher up the ground. I feel like if Houston comes in, then Isaac Quainer probably does go higher up the ground. Which perhaps means that him and Josh Dacos take control of the wins and Houston just goes back to halfback, which I will not complain at because I think Isaac Quainer was really out of form in 2024, and when he did move up the ground, it sort of gave him a bit of a spark. And Ivan Soldo, unfortunately, I feel like Ivan Soldo's partner's done more of the talking than what he has. I think that unfortunately for Port Adelaide fans, I think you just got to accept that that's a bad deal, and you just got to get out of it and move on. While he's still got capital, because if you hold him to his contract and then you keep him there, he doesn't play, he just loses value. And I guess the last thing you want to do is you want to have like a Cam McCarthy situation where the player basically just walks out of the club and says, I'm not playing at all. And then you're basically paying a player who's on your list to not do anything other than just, go home. So I feel like that Soldo will get his way out of Port Adelaide. It's just a question of where. I feel like Geelong would be a good, spot for him, given that I think he probably is a number one ruckman, and I feel like Reece Stanley is still only getting a game because they want to play Blitzarves in other roles. Chris Scott does, but if Ivan Soldo can get his way to Geelong, I feel like that will be the end of Reece Stanley, because I think Ivan Soldo will, become their number one ruckman, and perhaps, I guess, really help Geelong with probably fixing the one flaw they've had probably really since Brad Oddens, to be honest, and that is a really, really, I guess, strong hit out ruckman. So, I feel like based on that, it's hard to argue that losing a two-time All-Australian and basically getting in a flaky forward at best and a albeit classy forward, but only in his second AFL year, is going to be an improvement on your list. But time will tell on this. Again, I'm happy for Port Adelaide supporters to come at me for this, but I feel like based on what they're losing and what they're gaining, they probably haven't improved their list across the field. But again, time will tell on that. Lukosius might end up being a hit, and just, I guess, pour sour worms all over what I've just said. But I'm happy to ride that with Lukosius, because when he's on, and when he's off, he's really badly off. So, I feel like they've probably addressed their needs, but whether or not it can take them to that next level, time will tell on that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting one where some of these players would go. I know, as I said, St Kilda's heavily interested in Soldo. I think it weighs up whether do they sacrifice some of Marshall's ruck time and play a double ruck and entice him that way. Because definitely, in my opinion, I think having a tap-out ruckman and then Marshall is definitely more beneficial moving forward. It looked like the case when Paddy Ryder was at the club. But yeah, you definitely make a valid point with regards to Geelong as well, and the sell of potentially being that full-time ruck for years to come for Soldo. And, Geelong had never been the strongest ruck category for a while now. But yeah, as you said, the trade-ins, there are lots left to be desired for. They're not A-grade players coming through the door. They're more role players, it seems like. And, at the end of the line, Port probably don't have the best track record when it comes to transforming players. They haven't really had that in a while. So really, Willie Rioli's probably been the last one coming into a club making a big difference when he's fit. So it's yet to be seen what will happen with that. And yeah, I think Port really have to make a statement and really push for broke with their list in 2025. But moving on to our player focus before we wrap up. Tonight's episode is, in fact, the young gun in Jace Burgoyne. I think he had a really, really strong final series playing off that half-back line, albeit without a Houston and Kane Farrell, both due to injury, and I think he really stepped up in that mould. 123 Supercoach points versus the Tigers, which is his best home and away points to date. In round 19, 24 disposals, 7 tackles, 4 inside 50s. I'm not exactly sure whether he played off halfback or on the wing for that one, but nonetheless, he showed his defensive capabilities there, and he's a really accurate kick. He reminds me a lot of Nazai Wanganeen-Miller in the fact he's pretty lanky, gets the ball, does good things with it. I think if Houston does leave, it presents a massive opportunity for someone like Jace Burgoyne to take that spot. You got also Miles Bergman there as well. But they look shaky, and it wasn't until Jace Burgoyne stepped in and really used his foot skills to the best of his capabilities there. It's a potential that he can, go strength for strength in that Port lineup. I'm pretty sure he was defensive eligible in Supercoach this season. I know he was rookie priced, and people really didn't jump.
Yes, he is defensive eligible.
He wasn't really jumped on until late. Realistically speaking, I think a lot of people already had positions filled up in their defensive line and didn't bring him in. I think he was one that actually a lot of people missed out on, even though he increased in price and he was kind of priced out for a lot of people. And then he just went from strength to strength. And I think he's one that you could definitely watch on for next season, because granted, he's probably going to be at an elevated price, but especially if Houston leaves, someone's got to be there, role player down back and take the kickouts and whatnot, whether that is Bergman or Ryan Burton. But I think Jace Burgoyne's one that's very enticing player, and yeah, I think Paul won the ball in his hands, and that was on show for the final series. What are your thoughts on Jace Burgoyne? Is there any other players that come to mind when it comes to the power?
No, I think Burgoyne was the one I had as well, and maybe Horn Francis as well. I feel like Horn Francis is going to break out at some stage. And really shoot that average above, he was 99.7 in 2024. So I feel like he's someone who can tip over 100 in
Yeah.
2025 as he sort of gets more used to Port Adelaide and the way they play.
Yeah.
He gets another preseason behind him, so I can really see him, I guess, elevating. But I think Jace Burgoyne's the one who just goes back. I know he played on the wing most of the second half of the year when he sort of did start spiking. But yeah, I feel like he just goes to the half back line. A bit Nasiah Wanganeen Malera-esque, and this becomes their distributor replacement for Houston. And yeah, I can see if he's defensive eligible again. I'm not sure if he is. I'll have to go and do my own research on that one. But I feel like if he is defensive eligible, he might be worth a bit of a look. But if he's not defensive eligible, I don't think I'd be picking him as a midfielder. So that's probably going to be the one, I guess, caveat about Burgoyne. Is what position he gets. But yeah, having a look here, I think Horn Francis will improve on that 99.7. Rosie had a bit of an off year. He only got 98.3. I feel like he can go back up above 100 next year. And then, there's probably not really a lot of other people who I could see perhaps, taking their game to that next level. So, yeah, I think the only ones I'd probably be keeping my eye on are obviously Butters, but I think everyone's sold on Butters. But Horn Francis and Rosie, more Rosie just because he underperformed, and Burgoyne were the three for me that I picked out.
Yeah, I think they're in a similar mold to the Crows with regards to their top players, slightly underperforming. Probably not as bad as the Crows, but yeah, Rosie was one that really flunked it since coming back from his injury, really never got to his best. Butters was definitely, top 5-10 in the competition. Was highlighted in the Brownlow as well, but he's one that can even step up to the next level. But I think you're right in Horn Francis. Enough's been said with the potential and all that. He's definitely shown his ability to play forward and the midfield. He's one that, he's like a Dangerfield where he plays forward and he's like a key forward up there, like your Cripps and Bontempelli and stuff like that. So I think he needs to jump to the next level. But yeah, Burgoyne, I think if he's defensive eligible and doesn't, for whatever reason, lose that defensive eligibility, then I think he's one to look at. But I think that really is dependent on pre-season as well because, the last thing you want to do when it comes to Supercoach is bring in a speculative pick like Burgoyne with an elevated price. I'm talking if he gets to 300 plus start price or whatever. But yeah, you bring him in and then all of a sudden he's playing off a wing and, pushing into half forward territory when you got the likes of Bergman and Burton already perusing that half back line. But yeah, Burgoyne's one to definitely look at because he's shown when he gets the ball in his hand, he scores. So yeah, definitely interesting one to look at for next season. But that's all we got time for this episode. We're trying to keep them nice and short, so not overly long into the hour and a half mark or anything like that. But next week, just bringing up the sheet now, we've got a big one, the D's, Tigers and the Dogs wash up. So 3 big Victorian clubs and 3 clubs that really just flunked it up this season. Dogs probably a slight caveat on that based on the fact they made finals at a last-ditch effort. But yeah, 3 really, really disappointing clubs, 3 interesting clubs as well, considering mass exodus really at the D's with regards to their culture, and the Tigers losing players left, right, centre, and the Dogs just really not finding their best mix, considering they've got some of the best players in the competition. So definitely interesting conversation to listen to next week. And if you have any other questions as well based on
Super, tune in for the Dogs bit because I've got some bombshell stuff about the Bulldogs that is going to blow people away.
Yeah, so don't miss out on that. And if you have any questions and queries with regards to anything that we've said on the podcast, feel free to let us know through the DMs on Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. And we'll leave the stuff at the bottom of our show as well to any social media stuff you can pop onto. And also be sure to check out our Twitter feed as well because we've put up a thread there with all the updated trades and rumours and, requests and all that. So if you're busy at work and can't be scrolling through AFL.com to figure out who's been traded and whatnot, just check out our thread. It's literally all there for you with regards to confirms and requests. So definitely give that a check out to keep up to date with the trade period. But other than that, we'll catch you next Monday for the next episode of SC Clubs.